Good morning. Okay, thank you. Good morning. On behalf of SACOG and the Sacramento County, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Urban Land Institute presentation to discuss attainable housing and commercial corridors and to hear from experts from the Urban Land Institute. I also want to give a special shout out to our own local chapter, Urban Land Institute Chair, Amy Lappin. So Amy, thank you for being here and for all of your work on behalf of Sacramento Region. I'm Sue Frost, and I serve as the supervisor in Sacramento County for the 4th District, which includes communities and cities such as Antelope, Rio Linda, Orangevale, Citrus Heights, and Folsom. I also serve on the SACOG Board of Directors. Through this, I hear about common issues facing communities throughout the Sacramento region. Our region is the fastest growing region in California, and we're experiencing some growing pains. Our housing production isn't keeping up, and we're not producing enough new housing to meet the demands of the growing population. This problem is particularly acute in our existing communities, where housing costs have become more and more unattainable for the average working family. At the same time, the nature of retail is changing, and many of our commercial corridors are over-retailed, underdeveloped, and unfriendly to pedestrians. Many lack identity and a kind of unifying sense of place. There's an opportunity to revitalize and redevelop our existing communities while meeting both these challenges head-on. Today, we'll hear about the work of this National Urban Land Institute expert panel and what they have completed in our Sacramento region, delving into 2 commercial corridors, North Watt Avenue in North Highlands and the Folsom's Central Business District. The work brings an impartial, outside perspective about what's needed to accelerate housing and infill development in these suburban corridor settings. The work presented today by our expert panel could not be timelier, and I want to thank the panelists and everyone who was involved in this effort to bring this ULI program to our region. But before we hear from our esteemed ULI presenters, I'd like to turn over to my colleague on the SACOG board and also Folsom City Council member Mike Kozlowski, who will be talking to us about how the region has organized around Green Means Go as a way to overcome these barriers to infill redevelopment. Mike?
Great job. Thank you, Supervisor Frost, and everybody for being here this morning. As you mentioned, as well as representing the City of Folsom, it's been my pleasure to serve on the SACOG board and engage with our colleagues throughout the 6-county region on topics just like this. I'm thrilled to be with you this morning to dive into this critical issue facing communities not only like Folsom, but also the rest of the region, state, and even the nation. So probably useful for us to take a step back and give some context for SACOG's Green Means Go program and the reasons for the expert panel today. Green Means Go is programmatically a key component of how the Sacramento region will implement its land use and transportation planning going forward while meeting our environmental mandates. The Sacramento region is different than communities along the coast of California or in Southern California, so our solutions to meet those statewide targets have to be different also. Green Means Go has benefited from several years of outreach to sharpen its focus around accelerating infill development through infrastructure investments. 26 of the 28 cities and counties, the jurisdictions in our region, have participated in identified green zones in their town or city, suburb, or urban environment. These locally adopted green zones are areas that have capacity for more infill housing, could benefit from supportive local policies, and would revitalize existing communities while providing more travel options, which is key. Both North Watt and Folsom's Central Business District, which will be subject of discussion today, are great examples of locally adopted green zones and as Supervisor Frost mentioned, examples of the opportunities and challenges that those zones face. I think that the findings and recommendations on these two corridors will have much broader relevance and will be used as case studies across the Sacramento region and in wider areas. There are similar corridors facing similar issues throughout the region, and we'll need to work together to weave their individual solutions and success into one cohesive plan to help the region thrive. So I want to say thank you to some of my Folsom staff. Pam Johns is here, who's our Community Development Director, and she's had a lot of help from Desmond Parrington and others in our city staff to help move things along here and help identify this green zone, so it's great for us in Folsom. And with that, I want to now turn it over to the Urban Land Institute for perspectives on how this aligns with their goals and priorities, and then, of course, to hear the expert panel. But I guess I'm introducing next ULI America's President, Gwyneth Coate. Thank you.
So I have some slides that hopefully we can get going. And I'm going to ask for Barbara or Fabiola to see if that can get going. Yeah, there we go. We're starting to, there we go. Well, good morning. I am delighted to be here with everybody. I have spent this week on the West Coast, first in Los Angeles, and then came in to Sacramento yesterday. It is an absolute pleasure to serve in the role as President of the Americas, because I so believe in the mission of the Urban Land Institute to shape the future of the built environment for transformative impact in communities worldwide. And we support our mission through our mission commitments, which are, let's see if I can get this to advance. And Barbara, I must be doing something wrong because I'm not getting this to advance, even though I'm pressing. There you go. So someone is moving it for me, or I got lucky. So thank you. Tech help here. We're double checking all of that. Appreciate. All right, so we'll go back. I'll talk anyways without this. So our mission commitments are to connect, inspire, and lead, and that's precisely what we're doing today. We're bringing people together to create the best practices, delve into this land use issue, and lead in ways that we can create more equitable, sustainable communities for all. I wanted to talk specifically about what our mission priorities are. So when we move to the next slide, or I'll just keep talking. We recently, a couple years ago, came up with our 3 mission priorities. Decarbonization, the path to net zero. These are global initiatives, and ULI as a global organization wants to address these topics across the globe. Increasing housing attainability, which is precisely what the topic is today, as well as educating the future diverse leaders. And all of this is underscored and underpinned by a very important foundational approach, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, because we recognize that we must have our communities be sustainable and accessible, sustainable, and fair to all. If it works for everybody, we all are better off. So I'm very excited about the mission priorities that we have recently created. Now, for those of you who don't know much about the Urban Land Institute, I'm pleased to say we're now over 47,000 members. So if we can go to the next slide, that would be great. We are in more than 80 countries across the globe. About 40,000 of the members are here in the Americas. We do a number of things across the Institute in our programs and our content, our education, including the advisory services panels. Next slide will show you that the advisory services panels were started in 1947. So next year we will be celebrating 75 years of having our advisory services panels, thank you, Fabiola, in place. They're a hallmark of distinction for what it is that the Urban Land Institute does. We bring in experienced real estate land use experts who can solve the most critically important land use issues to ensure that we are creating those equitable communities for all. So specifically, what is a 5-day panel? It is an intensive 5-day experience. where the sponsor gives a brief of the overall issue that we are asked to solve, site tours, interviews, deliberations, and recommendations, and then what we're here today to experience is the final presentation. So very excited to hear what it is that our panel has recommended. I want to make sure to thank SACOG and all of their support in bringing us here, and specifically would like to recognize James Corliss and Garrett Ballard Rosa. I want to thank the Urban Land Institute's Terwilliger Center, which has been key to putting this together as well. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Mary Clementi, who's here. Mary, raise your hand. There you are, I couldn't see you, who has really done an amazing effort throughout ULI Sacramento as our executive director for this local district council. And I want to thank Isabel, whose last name I'm not going to get correct. So Isabel D'Amico, there you go, I did it close enough, who is the district council chair. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to our fearless chairperson, Philip Payne. I've had the pleasure of working with Phil, or knowing Phil, for the last 4 years. One of my first dinners at ULI, we had the chance to sit next to each other, and his passion and commitment to creating more in strong land use decisions to create more attainable housing is evident in all the work that he's done. So Phil, over to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Gwyneth. You know, I sat there and got everything. There we go. I'm still in a little bit of shock because I was referred to as being esteemed, and I know I'm getting older, but I've never had anybody call me esteemed yet, so I guess it's a new status here. I guess I'm happy about it, but it kind of relates to getting old, so. Anyway, I'm Philip Payne, and I've had the privilege of being the chairman of this panel. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina, where I currently serve as the chairman of the Lotus Campaign, which is a 501c3, whose mission is to facilitate the placement of those who have experienced homelessness in market rate apartments or market rate housing. My area of expertise is actually moderate and low income housing with a special interest in housing for those who have experienced homelessness. Okay. In addition to our sponsors and all the people Gwyneth already recognized, there was a long list of people who have additional people who've been around to help us over the last week. Those include members and staff of ULI Sacramento, the government officials and employees who so willingly shared their knowledge, expertise, thoughts, and time with us, those who participated in our information gathering interviews, ULI staff assigned to this project to help us, and of course our panelists. As we go through the presentation, each of the panelists is going to introduce themselves rather than me stand up here and go through the whole list. But I do want to tell you, this has been, they were an excellent panel to work with. All of them were volunteers. All of them were chosen for their areas of expertise in the study on the matter we were going to study. None of them, by the way, have any business or financial relationship with the communities in which this panel was conducted. Okay. Earlier this year, ULI was asked by the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, also known as SACOG, to assemble a panel to study the commercial quarters of North Watt Avenue in unincorporated Sacramento County and the City of Folsom's Central Business District. The panel was asked to provide its thoughts, guidance, and recommendations as to the advisability of embarking on a plan to sustainably revitalize these quarters with the goal of creating a vibrant, walkable, mixed-use, mixed-income community, especially with the goal of adding more housing. In addition, we were asked to answer these 6 questions. Rather than sit here and read them all to you, I'm going to let you read them, and we'll give you a copy later. Let's just say we're not going to answer them one by say one, and here's the answer. We've just answered them throughout the entire conversation. Before we start the presentation, I want you to know that I've been in many ULI advisory panels, and I have never seen one with a scope of engagement as large, open-ended, complex, or daunting as this one. 2 locations, each with its own set of issues, the competing interplay of issues of site suitability, economic viability of the completed product, limited financial resources, community concerns, scale, impact on existing businesses, traffic patterns, infrastructure, the type and amount of housing, the cost of that housing, and as if it wasn't enough, environmental concerns. And, you know, this has not been an easy one to work with. To give you a feel for how the report comes into existence, we have started a few weeks ago receiving detailed briefing material information, and everybody went through that and we discussed it. And then on Sunday, we all arrived and met with our sponsors and members of city and county staff. On Monday, we had guided tours of both sites, continued our discussions with the sponsors and governmental staff, and met with other interested parties. Tuesday, we interviewed approximately 40 individuals representing a cross-section of the community, and these interviews included sponsors, community members, local ULI members, elected officials, government employees, business owners, developers, and a cross-section of other interested citizens. Then on Tuesday night, the real work began when the panelists locked themselves in a room and for the next 2 days discussed, debated, crafted, honed the report we will present today. A little bit of warning for you. If you see any of the panelists who appear to be dazed, I refer to this as panel brain. It's a temporary condition that comes from the fact that sleep and relaxation are not included on our work schedule. I can assure you that everybody will fully recover, and they will all eventually come to view their time here as both enjoyable and rewarding. Okay, our presentation is really divided into 3 sort of sections. The first is going to talk about the issues of vision, leadership, and community buy-in. Then we'll move on to sort of a broad framework for developing sustainable 15-minute communities. And lastly, we'll get into specific recommendations around infrastructure, transportation, and housing. At this time, I would like to introduce Rochelle Mills, who will start our presentation.
Good morning, everyone. As he mentioned, my name is Rochelle Mills. I'm with Innovative Housing Opportunities. We're a nonprofit affordable housing developer based in Orange County and Santa Ana. My background over the last, it's almost been 40 years, is architecture. They say everyone has 7 careers, and I think I've just about had all of them. Architecture, cultural tourism, editing. I was a planning commissioner, developer now, and a business owner. I think it gives me a unique perspective to see the entire ecosystem and the work that we're doing here. In talking about vision and leadership in this community, I think it's really interesting to note that we have 2 very distinct communities that we're discussing. Distinct in topographies, in DNA, their own personalities, traffic patterns, and economies. But in terms of vision, they were almost identical in alignment. The priorities in general, both North Watt and the Folsom Business District share a vision for safe, human-scaled versus auto-scaled neighborhoods, and neighborhoods is important rather than looking at a larger community context or city context. They really wanted to drill in on the personality of that small community. They're all interested in homes that are affordable to a diversity of residents at income levels who can live, work, play, and more importantly, build roots in their communities. Connection to residences, to the commercial district, and other amenities that both communities talked about and were very proud of, like trails, like business offerings, transit opportunities, et cetera. They wanted to have a place where locals, both businesses and residents alike, could be proud to belong and proud to invite other people to visit. Calm traffic, wayfinding and green space, and recreation for all ages. And more importantly, they wanted to find a reason to stick around and stay and enjoy the communities there, not to have to leave their communities to find those kinds of components that make a community a special one. The question was, would they support housing, infill housing? The answer was yes, if. And this, the top two were the same across both areas, if it serves both the working and intergenerational households. That came up quite a bit, intergenerational households, and if it also enhances the local business district. And only if the infrastructure was in place to support the growth. And by infrastructure, I mean sewer, lighting, sidewalks, accessibility, parking, all of those things. It was generally understood that if those components couldn't be there, then they would have a hard time supporting it. And that is something that we wholeheartedly agree upon. Now, specifically in the Folsom CBD, infill housing was a yes if the design was inspired and attractive. There was some concern that they felt that the designs were a little bit pedestrian and they wanted something that would be uplifting. Yes, if the design matched the density and the massing, because there was a fear that we would have these giant towering projects that would just not be in character with the scale of a community. Yes to infill if it created a unique destination. Destination being the key word here. And yes, in some cases, we have to understand the economic realities. We had a couple of businesses say point blank, yes, if someone else picks up the tab or defrays the cost to implement, recognizing that they want to see something happen, but there's going to be a period of downtime and they're not sure if they could handle that burden. Specifically in the North Watt area, it was yes to infill if the housing promotes connectivity throughout the area and beyond. And yes, also if it offers options for the workforce households within the McClellan Park, which is adjacent to that area, and new families that are moving into the community. Regarding leadership, will, and buy-in, and that's critical because you cannot move a process like this forward without having leadership identified, without having the will to do it, and without having the buy-in of the constituents. Here are some of the strengths. In terms of the Folsom district, it was family-friendly and great nature trails that came up several times. There was long-term residents. A lot of the people we interviewed were there from 20 years to 42 years. So you had very engaged, long-term residents. And when I say engaged, we had responses from high school students, we had responses from business, from residents, just a really robust engagement in that community. More buy-in than skepticism. And generally, there was support along the trifecta, the community, the city council, and the chamber. That means the electeds, the businesses, and the residents, and that's usually hard to get. So that's a big deal, the strengths in that area. In terms of challenges, there was admittedly no financial resources. And this is not uncommon. But it was very clear particularly from the city representatives, that there are no funds to support this. And there was desire to have us help them figure out some solutions, and we've got some for you. There's no ability to create or implement the vision. And I thought that that was really sobering to have someone acknowledge that that skill is not within the stakeholders that are there. The business owners generally feared a change to anything that related to parking and traffic. They equated traffic with pedestrians, and pedestrians or traffic with customers. And so any discussion over underutilized parking or closing off excessive numbers of curb cuts really did give palpitations to the interviewees. And in general, a lack of understanding of the process and how to prioritize, and that's understandable. In terms of the North Watt area, here were the strengths. Lots of vacant land at great prices. Adjacency to the light rail, a large employment base and potential partner in McClellan Park, and they had secured a couple of grants already, over $500,000 in a Caltrans planning grant and $13.7 million for complete street projects. The challenges were a lack of cohesive social infrastructure, and it's outlined in the second bullet point. McClellan Park wasn't very engaged with the broader community. To the extent, an example was during the the height of the COVID crisis, neighbors in the adjacent areas didn't come onto that campus because they felt that it wasn't accessible to them. And so there is a disconnect that that's a resource that they have full access to. There's a weak market for housing today. And there was something that I thought is really worth noting when you talk about the difference between the two. There was a little bit of a perception of a lack of buy-in, inconsistent buy-in, and even some indifference in terms of the stakeholders who did come out. We had some no-shows, and that was quite a bit different than what we experienced in the Folsom area. But that could be because the county planning department is short-staffed and over-prioritized. Diversity, equity, inclusion. As you heard, this is a critical area in terms of the Green Means Go program, in terms of ULI, SACOG, and certainly the stakeholders. Why is that important? Because people do ask about that. Well, you want to have communities that reflect the values and the people who you serve, or the people that will be coming into those communities. And how is this report of ours going to address that? We're going to address that by promoting mixed income communities. Why that's important is that you have a continuum of income levels, not just from those coming outside, but you've got long-term residents in these communities that want to have their children stay in those communities, and they're going to be coming in at a different level. Or you've got empty nesters that are wanting to downsize and you want them to be there. So creating a mix of incomes, a structure that allows all of them to live in the community is critical. Building the social infrastructure in both communities to deepen the engagement. Having a more robust community engagement in North Watt, similar to what we're seeing in Folsom, would be great. In Folsom, you've got a high opportunity corridor. So there's one of the suggestions that we're going to say is bring more opportunities for mixed income housing and support the local businesses with the housing and other access, bringing people in and creating, as someone said, the there in these communities. In North Watt, you've got an under-resourced corridor. The suggestions are to improve the urban environment and enhance mobility and economic opportunity for the existing residents. Acquire the land, and so you can create a robust housing strategy in the area and capitalize on environmental justice community. They have an annual environmental justice forum, but really capitalize on that. What are the next steps? Build consensus through leadership and social infrastructure. There's simple ways that we can do this. One of the things we like to do is during that 2-year process when you're when you're engaging and putting the plan together, get the community activated by activating the underutilized parking lots with pop-up events, simple events, street fairs, performances, so that people start to imagine what this can be. And there's more buy-in and opportunity for investment in that. More opportunities to build ambassadors, create cyclovia type events, biking events, jogging trails that connect to the existing assets that you have, corridors that connect to existing amenities, engage artists and landscape designers to create a public art placemaking strategy. And one that is unique to the Watt Corridor is that the County of Sacramento can target a transformative climate communities grant to build the corridor capacity and infrastructure. Thanks.
Good morning, and thank you for having us. My name is Lewis Knight. I've recently joined Sarah, which is a design and planning firm headquartered in Portland, but now based in Oakland, which, fortunately for me, has reduced my commute from an hour and a half to 15 minutes. I also did want to talk a little bit, and I'm going off script here, Philip, so I apologize, about the housing experience and the housing experience that we heard from particularly the younger people in the communities. When we first moved to the Bay Area 22 years ago, my wife and I, and our two young children, experienced moments of technical homelessness, living in multi-generational households, shared house living, eviction, and but for the grace of her parents who helped us with the deposit, we're still in the same house that we bought 22 years ago. This is the experience that Californian young people have today. It's also one that's been around for a long time. So I think it's high time that we actually started to think about getting it right. I have a history of 20, 30 years of helping communities develop strategies around how they want to grow, be successful, be environmentally sustainable, develop the housing and the jobs and the manner and the type of community in which they want to grow into. But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm actually here to talk about sort of environment, sustainability and resilience, and reiterate why it's important and how it can actually help play out in terms of the attitudes around mixed income, multi-generational communities. And I think, why does it matter? Climate Central has just done a recent multi-city evaluation of the country, and they estimate, and this is probably conservative, that by 2100, Sacramento's climate will look much more like that in the Great Salton Sea near the Mexican border. What does that mean in actuality? It'll be hotter, everything else. We also recognize that infill is really good, but no one understands the data very well. Infill housing, it uses 40% less water, 33% less miles traveled, significantly less greenhouse gases, and the opportunity of taking on aged and unregenerated sites that are a drain on general fund revenues at the local council is one that we cannot turn up. Population and increased densities drive retail spend, but they also drive a lot of efficiencies that we tend to overlook. It is much cheaper to develop infrastructure in existing service areas than it is to do it on the periphery. It's also cheaper to deliver public services. It drives multi-generational, multi-income communities, which are actually much more resilient to disaster and stresses over time. And there's some evidence to suggest that walkable communities are 20% less likely to default on home mortgages. So think about it. If we can't work out how to do multi-generational, mixed income, denser housing and development in these corridors, then we're failing the next generations. The future of Sacramento, we've always said it's going to be hotter. It's likely going to be drier. There's likely going to be bigger flood incidents. In my own experience, as Australia went through the millennium drought, and this year, Sydney alone has had 5 times the average rainfall that it receives on an annual basis. So the extremes are going to get much greater. So our infrastructure really needs to be properly prepared for these changes. We're also likely to see significant agricultural change, and we again have experienced significant fires in the hills, and this is one of the opportunities McClellan would like to talk about. So driving this, all of this is starting to think through how the energy transition matters and how do we get people out of their cars. 40% of the state's emissions are in transportation sector. And we think that the recommendations are actually really quite simple. Like Ithaca and New York, which created its Green New Deal, we really need to drive towards vision and partnership. That means that we need to have shared recognition of the issues that require that action. We map and analyze, as Ithaca did, to demonstrate the problems. Establish a shared financial target for early phase projects. And design in the ability to scale and multiply proven successes. There's an awful lot of metrics out there for what sustainability or resilience or decarbonization look for. We need to use plain English, basically. We need to localize it, we need to demystify it, and we need to have achievable goals as part of the early pilot establishment. And this will ripple through any number of core targets. But if we don't concentrate on water, energy, the efficiency of the built environment, the decarbonization, mobility, and livability or quality of life metrics. We need new and intentional financing models. One of the great joys of my last 6 years has been working on Facebook's housing programs, and the one thing that we consistently came back from people delivering homeless shelters to doing affordable housing to doing mixed income or unsubsidized housing was that we need greater flexibility of financing models and a little bit more willingness to invest in early phase innovation. So how do we get to do that? If we're going to build modular, we need to rethink the investment cycles around the typical steps of building a new home. We need to expand the sunset bonding of the 30-year infrastructure bonds, as San Francisco did for Treasure Island. They expanded it to a 99-year sunset to create an adaptation fund and a maintenance fund to support the infrastructure. We need to consider tax abatements and synthetic TIF structures. This is how Nashville got its downtown regenerated over the last 15 to 20 years. We need to think about a regional transfer of development rights program similar to the way that Montgomery County and Seattle did it, which has protected wildlands, protected ag land, and driven development into the core rather than away from it. We need to appropriately price risk into the real estate fees. It's actually more risky to build in the wildland interface than it is to build in the urban cores. And we need to simplify and reduce overall the impediments to infill and green development. Oakland right now is considering a net zero energy bonus overlay zone. So if you do projects that sequester carbon, they're going to give you additional density at no cost with no impact on the fees. And then finally, we need to start small with actionable, scalable pilot programs that prove their feasibility and actually drive the proof of concept that we can believe in. And I think that the narrative here is Saul Griffith, who's an Australian Genius Award winner, moved his entire family back to Australia about 18 months ago because he found electrification too hard to do. And his goal in the next year is to establish a pilot program of a community of 250,000 going fully electric. And it was easier for him to do that in Australia because the fees were less, the cost of solar was less, and the institutional resistance to change was less. So we really need to think about how we use pilots as a way of proving the reality that infill housing and multi-generational, multi-family districts are actually better for the community, better for community creation, and better financially, and better for the planet. And with that, I'd like to invite Yvonne to the rostrum to talk about the components of a 15-minute walkable community.
Thank you, Louis. Hi, everyone. My name is Yvonne Young. I'm the CEO of SDG Strategies, which stand for Sustainable Development Goals. So I have spent 20 years in the public and private sector, primarily advising cities, focusing on how we can make the shift from auto-centric to walkable, complete, family-oriented, and competitive cities of the future. So I'm from the Toronto ULI District Council. So if you are coming to spring meeting, I'm going to see you there. What I want to present today is a very tangible and simple framework focusing on how we can use 15-minute walkable communities as a scalable model so you can accelerate introducing high quality housing along this corridor. So it's going to focusing on creating the understanding, leveraging on three key components: the access to, and also the adjacency to amenity, the access to nature, and also making the shift and making walking and cycling as the top choice. So what's shown on screen in here is the first site is North Watts. It's around a 4 miles corridor. It has the opportunity for future connection to the LRT to the south. It has iconic proximity actually to the creek and some of the greenery surrounding the area as well. It also have a scattered of local amenities along the corridor. It's currently serving the existing residential community to the east side of the boulevard. So we see there's opportunity through here. The first step is to break down the scale into 5 walkable neighborhoods. So when we say 15-minute walkable neighborhood, the goal is to reduce the experience from driving to walking and thinking about how we can make it possible so that all your daily needs is within a 15-minute walking distance. So through that, we're going to use diving into one of the area and trying to demonstrate a scalable model that you can apply across other auto-centric area. So what's shown on screen, this is Folsom. It's the CBD. It has the history of being the magnet and also the gateway to the city. So we heard that there is a lot of activities within this area, and there's also a lot of the key components we can build upon. For example, it has the iconic proximity to the surrounding river and creek. It has the extensive trail network in place. It also have a community that's value about high quality form of life, on education, on wellness. So there's a lot of elements that we can build upon in here. One of the key feedback we heard through an interview from the stakeholders is that how we can utilize the amenity as the attraction for the new gateway. That will be the focus of our strategy. So we're going to look at within a 15-minute walkable area. So this is around 250 acre. And to the south is Raleigh Street. To the north is the School Street. And in the middle is the East Bidwell Street. What we see is that this area already have existing trail system connecting to the surrounding greenery. And also the city has made an effort to create the existing node. So those are on the map along in here, and they are approximately around a 5-minute walking distance apart. So we see as a first opportunity is to focusing on expanding and retrofitting your existing street. The curb to curb distance is very wide. So there is a lot of opportunity as a priority is to transform those into very friendly walking and cycling experience, particularly with the child and families in mind. So this is a little bit tangible in terms of how to make it happen. So along the corridor, we observe that there are sections along the corridor with a lot of space. So as a first course of action is how to humanize this area by introducing greenery. So that would help not just to provide the shade, cooling the area down, but it also improve the air quality and noise and that. And a key thing to make this successful is provide activities and eyes on the street, so including along the arterial. So to the right in here is a demonstration. Is a project for a suburban municipality that is very fast growing, also has went through the similar transition. So as the first priority, the municipality focusing on expanding and providing very high quality walking and cycling experience that is kids friendly, child friendly. And the goal is that using that to create a sense of a local destination. So as we are introducing housing, we know that there will be a demand on soft infrastructure or human infrastructure. So the goal in here is to very quickly identify where are the existing activity node. So within this 15-minute walkable area, there are a number of hubs. So we call those hubs because they are primarily the destination relating to education. So those are the schools, the recreation, the library, but also there's a lot of destination relating to wellness. So in our conversation with the stakeholders, we understand that there's a lot of time, family time, and also the leisure time spent on fitness, wellness, aquatic. So those are the key elements that can build upon. But what is missing in this area are daycare and also some of the other components of the human infrastructure that can be put in place. So as we are touring around the area, we noticed, for example, the existing school has extensive number of portables. So there's an opportunity through growth to further expand the existing infrastructure and also mixing the users in the form of hub. And the goal is to provide a one-stop shop. So through there, it's not just the school and daycare and library and recreation. It also provides opportunity for health, social, arts and culture, design. There's a very strong focus about education and technology. That's the job of the future. And there's also a strong focus on how you can make this green. So you can leverage on a lot of the investment funding from different levels of government and also from the private sector as well. So in our experience working with this model, we have heard good feedback, particularly from the educator, because this in itself would make the community as a differentiation, as the first choice for new families to move into the neighborhood. And second element that we want to talk about is that building upon the strengths of the area, particularly in area with fragmented ownership. So the pragmatic solution is not to start from scratch, but it's really building along the strengths. So the key is that the eateries, the market spaces is scattered along the area, but currently it doesn't provide the experience, but it does drive a lot of people coming to the area. So the strategy is that how we can do some very quick improvement to bring those activities outside. And also starting to form 3 micro neighborhood so that it has a sense of circulation that is really bringing people in the most convenient way to the front doors of some of these facilities because they are very far apart from the main street. So this is an example, looking at a quick retrofit. Leveraging on, there are many markets, many supermarkets. So the image to the top left in here is an image of a market that also of a farmer's market as well. So there's opportunity of improving the pavement treatment, creating the sense of human scale with trellises, and also bringing some of these eating and dining and food-related activities outdoor. So this is a strategy that has been working really well, particularly for area that is still in the auto-centric, but it has a lot of activities related because family need to go to the area anyway. So building on that is that we want to introduce a framework for identifying a priority site that is appropriate for infill housing. So what we notice along this corridor is that there's a lot of great sites. They have good size. So you're looking at around 2 acres to 5 acres. They have pretty good configuration. So many of them, they are quite rectangular, and they also have a good frontages as well. Like in other words, they are already located right next to a street. So from the convenience standpoint, we see that there is opportunity to prioritize those and using that to create components of the key neighborhood. So with respect to the type of housing, there are new technology using mass timber, modular housing, introducing biophilia. So these type of rapid housing can happen as quickly as 2 weeks per floor. So this is an opportunity of using this to quickly not just introducing the mixed-use destination, but also to think about how many jobs, how many population, and very quickly plan backwards, thinking about what are the critical infrastructure that you need, how many units, how many GFA, so that you can make this plan into a reality. So now I'm going to turn the stage to Jenna, talk about how to make the infrastructure happen.
All right. Good morning. My name is Jenna Hornstock. Oop, can I move that? There. I'm Jenna Hornstock. I'm the Deputy Director SACOG for Southern California. I live in Los Angeles, that's where I'm from. But prior to SCAG, I've spent 20 years in local and municipal government. My first love was redevelopment before it was dissolved. But then I went on to run the joint development program at LA Metro, as well as first last mile planning and urban design. So, and I'm also a planning commissioner for the Citywide Planning Commission in Los Angeles. And so I consider myself an implementer on the public sector side. So it feels right to me that I'm going to transition us into the stage where we start to get into the nitty gritty of some key implementable actions, meaning when you get up on Monday or maybe the Monday after Thanksgiving, what are you going to think about doing? What's the first thing you're going to do? So we got some vision in terms of what's going on in the community about how to root us in sustainability and equity and inclusion and how to lead towards those 15-minute communities. So we're going to dive deeper. And the way we're going to talk about this as we go into transportation, infrastructure, and housing is really looking at some current conditions, giving you some regional ideas. We know that it's important for SACOG to think about ways their Green Means Go program can be applied, across the region. So we tried to extract some larger regional recommendations and then one for each corridor. So I'm going to start with the current conditions here and say that sewer and drainage are absolute impediments to housing development. Absolute. And you could see this image here of a 6.5 acre vacant site right on North Watt, and you could see the drainage happening on that site. That's not conducive to being redeveloped. We didn't have a lot of quantitative data about the current conditions and capacity, but we learned a lot from talking to stakeholders, from the cities, from the county, from developers and architects who kind of banged their head against the wall trying to do development. So we know that both corridors lack sewer capacity for the level of infill development that's desired. We know in North Watt, we heard anecdotally anticipated about $10 million for sewer investments. We know that North Watt needs a serious drainage study to think about redeveloping the corridor, and we think also potentially the Folsom Central Business District might need this kind of a study. We also know that at the county level, there's some staff capacity issues. I think they went from 8 to 4 staff during the pandemic, which was common in a lot of both public and private sector organizations. For both corridors, there's a lack of coordination we heard across departments in terms of, particularly when you're talking about infrastructure, you could be doing public works and planning and maybe an outside municipality that's doing the sewer or the water or electric. And so there's really a need for coordination, and there hasn't been to date a lot of coordination with those outside utilities. And we didn't get a chance to talk to them either. I want to add that for Folsom in particular, we heard from our stakeholders that safety is a critical concern. And so when we think about that kind of infrastructure in terms of lighting and kind of street and hardscape and how that can contribute to the area and its redevelopment. So our regional recommendations, right, starting with kind of how to think about realizing the revitalization of corridors. First is to prioritize investments in the utilities needed to deliver housing. This is not sexy stuff, right? It's sewer, it's water, it's electric. It doesn't make for great groundbreakings, but it's the work that needs to get done to set the foundation. But the Green Means Go program that SACOG has lifted up is really a great place to start, and you've got your two resources to look at this work. Realizing sustainability goals in these utility investments. So I think Louis did a great job setting the stage about how important it is to think kind of at a district level, think bigger about sustainability. So there are district designations you can look at, things like an eco district or LEED ND or these livable communities. There's a new Blackwater effort, at the state level. So as you're thinking about this on these corridors, obviously you have to tailor it to the area, but imbue those goals into your investments in these utilities. You can identify both short-term and multi-benefit outcomes. So what can you do immediately, but also how can you get multi-benefit outcomes in terms of sustainability and encouraging development. And you're going to hear us say a few times, dig once. That's a big part of multi-benefit outcomes. If you're digging up the street or you're going to do a project, try to dig once. And finally, you need staff capacity and case management services at the jurisdictional level. So that's at the city level, at the county level, but it's really hard to do infill development because you are coordinating across a lot of folks, and providing that service will go a long way to get the developers into your communities. So I'm going to focus now on the North Watt corridor recommendations. So this is the first time you're going to hear dig once out of many. This is maybe a wild goal, but there's $13 million or over $13 million to do a complete streets project that, from what I saw, is supposed to start construction in April. Is there any way to bring in some sewer and drainage work into that? That means you need money and some planning, but there's going to be work and disruption happening, and you know, you can really minimize disruption if you can do a bunch of things at once. Planning, there is the REAP 2 funding. So a great way to do it, if you get, you know, you have a large area and only so much funding. So how do you stretch it? Do a study for the whole plan. Look at the sewer and the drainage needs for that corridor. There will need to be a partnership with Regional SAN who handles the sewer and would need to lead those investments. In fact, that's really critical if you're going after the grant. Make that partnership happen. You need to include a financing strategy, right? To figure out how are we going to fund this? We're going to figure out what we need. And importantly, and you're going to hear this again for Folsom, get ready, plan for more housing than is currently zoned for. So if you're doing a capacity study, maybe think about 100 dwelling units to the acre, plan for more because you want to be successful. Designate the area with your Caltrans grant that you're about to kick off in North Watt. Think about identifying a sustainable district designation. It's not that hard to do, and since you're looking at transportation options, it's a good moment to marry that with sustainability goals. And do you want to be an eco district or a livable corridor? And I should note that adopting those kinds of designations does help you leverage other funding. Partnering, Rochelle talked about really a lack of social infrastructure, and as someone who's done a lot of community-based work, it was really noticeable in the Watt corridor. So can you find some of the local schools? McClellan Park has several. I know there's a community college nearby, American Rivers. Can you partner with them and maybe do a safe routes to school? That could be more of a short-term thing to do some immediate improvements and create walkability and activity. And finally, fill your vacancies at countywide planning and environmental review. And then I would say if you're going to hire 4 folks, cross your fingers, designate one of them to be your North Watt person. For Folsom Central Business District plan, so similar to North Watt, go after that REAP 2 funding and do your sewer and drainage plan. And again, have a financing strategy. And sorry to tell you this, but you need to plan for higher density on that corridor if you want to get housing and activity going. Partnering with your local businesses to have a short-term pedestrian lighting program. We heard a lot about lighting, and I should note that came up from the middle school as well, the Sutter students who gave us some great ideas and amazing feedback. Really good opportunity to try to do some immediate short-term help, but if you want to do dig once and you don't want to do a full investment in the streetscape and lighting, you could get lights up on businesses that are willing to do it, you know, the kinds that come on when people walk by, but start to do something to show the difference in that you're caring. And then finally, get your cross-departmental case management team going and focused on that area so that when folks come with energy and willingness to do the work, you're ready to welcome them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Keith to talk about transportation recommendations.
You know, one of the things that I was thinking about as I was sitting here is you know, bringing my blankie. I remember my kids, when they were very young, there was just this frayed area of a blanket that had been used for who knows how long. So I just want you to know that my blankie helps me feel a bit more comfortable. You know, I was thinking a little bit about what Gwendolyn mentioned earlier. You know, like many corridors, you know, across California and the U.S., North Watts and Folsom corridor, CBD corridors present, you know, inherent and perceived conflicts between transportation needs based on, you know, current use and the desire to create vibrant and active commercial and mixed use districts. I'll let you know, I'm the executive director of Reconnect Rondo. Reconnect Rondo is based in St. Paul, and the aim of the organization really is to lead a restorative movement to reignite a vibrant African-American cultural enterprise district that was ultimately destroyed by the highways themselves. But we want to use the transportation tool of Interstate I-94 to create 21 acres of new land. So we have a blank slate in essence, and to some extent, the things that you all are facing are a little bit more complex than that. Spent 18 years with the Department of Transportation, and really it's the jurisdictional relationships that I think that I've probably leaned in to try to help reorganize a bit kind of moving forward. You know, in order of importance, and I appreciate Jenna kind of going, you know, first in terms of really getting down to what really needs to be happening. I think in addition to the infrastructure stuff that she's talking about, transportation really should be number 2 priority. So infrastructure, utility stuff, and transportation both, you know, as it helps to address, you know, current needs and creates, you know, requisite inertia for community building and intentional planning for what is envisioned for community and business development. In support of this, particular attention and action should be taken to identify hubs for future activities. And certainly you heard Jenna, I'm sorry, Yvonne mentioned that as well, in order, you know, to really realize ultimately the activation of community. You know, further, how this helps to create and promote a public realm plan addressing mobility and safety. As such, as an example, safe routes to schools. Based on the material that was provided to us and the interviews, you know, that we conducted with stakeholders, the following challenges are presented. So when we think about really current conditions and challenges, I mean, without question, both corridors are key connectors between suburban communities and downtown Sacramento. Particularly, you know, the river crossing. You know, North Watts, certainly 53,000 vehicles per day. Folsom, CBD, 20,000 vehicles a day. You know, sidewalks fronted by surface parking, retail setbacks, if you will, narrow sidewalks with really no shading. So that in and of itself poses quite a bit of a challenge. When we think about the current conditions and also the challenges that are related to these conditions, no bike infrastructure, you know, many curb cuts and driveways, a lack of pedestrian lighting, zoning requires large setbacks and easements for anticipated car-centric improvements. So with North Watts in particular, the current condition and also the opportunity is certainly the Caltrans study, BRT, the 550,000 that was certainly secured and preparing to be executed, the 13.7 million complete streets project between Orange Grove and Roseville Road, light rail stations at the north edge of the corridor itself, underutilized surface parking, and the possibility for establishing mobility nodes. That's North Watts. But when we really think a bit more related to Folsom, the current conditions and opportunities really are the 2015 Complete Streets Plan, recent approved trail plan, sidewalk connectivity projects on Riley, East Bidwell to the Historic District. The middle school has been mentioned a couple of times, and you'll probably hear a bit more about that, but that really is an opportunity. And we really view that as an opportunity and an asset. Underutilized surface parking, as was noted also by Yvonne, and how that might be leveraged. Compact corridors, really in essence, you know, small things become more noticeable when it's all said and done, and possibility for mobility hubs. You can hear kind of the common things that both North Watts and Folsom have when it's all said and done. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry about that. Thank you. So moving forward in terms of regional recommendations, both corridors present, as we mentioned, an ability to kind of move in a humanly friendly way. But when we think about these three buckets, committing to a corridor vision becomes very, very important. That means all need to be on the same page: elected officials, jurisdictional staff, and stakeholders. Plan moving forward around that vision by building a strong leadership team, establishing critical success factors, seek partners and ambassadors who are able to kind of articulate and move that forward, and then build the plan and prepare yourself for execution. One of the things that is clearly observable is while there is a lot of interest in kind of moving things forward, the real challenge is the actual plan and the execution of various activities that I know everyone is excited to get to, but certainly has been unable to kind of move forward. And then finally, money, more money, more money. That certainly is the challenge. So we've laid out a couple of things that we think are important. Two, reconnecting communities, pilot grants, which is an important of that $1 billion resource that's available. I would suggest that could be a source of resource to consider. Safe routes to schools programs, congestion mitigation and air quality improvement grants, local and regional project assistance grants, the RISE grants, et cetera, would be considerations. Transportation with respects to North Watts in terms of recommendations, implement the Complete Streets project, identify alternative routes for bike infrastructure, and I'll share that with you in just a moment on the following slide, what I mean by that. Implement Caltrans study, which you already have and have readied, but it's just a matter of moving forward with it. Consider, tactical urbanism projects along the corridor, which have been referenced previously. Partner with local schools and identify safe routes to school, grant opportunities, pursue really funding to address the culvert and area around the UP Railroad. This slide really illustrates what we mean. It's really North Watts, but in terms of the way that one might think about, I think the corridor itself is an area of great attention and focus, but consideration of an alternative way in which to position or route, bike lanes really ought to be looked at as well. It presents an opportunity to really ensure focusing on infrastructure, less heavy trafficked road, and particularly attention around 34th Street as one illustration of that. In terms of Folsom specifically, revisit and update the Complete Streets plan and implement, tactical urbanism, which is something that we've already kind of mentioned a bit, but really it's about implement that rather than observe that the study's been done without the kind of action that is required. And then partnering, we talked about Sutter Middle School just as one illustration of an opportunity for partnership to happen. So with that, I'll transition.
Oh, I need the clicker, yeah. So I am going to channel Andrew Jacobowitz. He is the Vice President of Policy Development for Enterprise Community Partners. He is based in DC, and he was with us till the bitter end. He had to get on a red eye last night. But he does policy development. He oversees policy development and research on issues related to affordable housing, equitable housing, and community development, finance, foreclosures, and neighborhood stabilization. So he was really our lead, working with the team on our housing strategy. And this is the last chunk of deep recommendations we're going to focus on before we bring it all together. So really the driving question right behind this was, can these corridors support housing and how do we get there? And we know that you have successfully completed for the city and the county, you have your RENA allocation, your regional housing needs allocation, you have your housing elements, so you know the number of units you're supposed to deliver, at what income levels, and you have lists of sites about where you have committed to driving that housing. However, we also know that your current zoning on both corridors, if we just kind of average it out, is around 20 dwelling units to the acre, an FAR floor area ratio of about 1.5 to 1. So what we're telling you today is that your zoning, your parking requirements, your lack of infrastructure, and the general, cost of market construction make housing development uneconomic in the current market climate. It's going to be really tough for you to meet those goals unless you take some actions. So, current conditions, this is really based on what we know from the briefing book on recent investments and stakeholder feedback. You've had some success with Project Roomkey and Homekey. Those have been really successful programs across the state for creating affordable housing. So we've just got some of the projects listed here in each corridor. But in North Watt, there's really no additional housing directly on the corridor. There's some existing rental housing in McClellan Park, and they've got also planned residential, both new and some conversions of existing properties. But I should note, actually from one developer trying to develop on the corridor and from the park, we heard it's been challenging. So this likens back to the difficulty of coordinating, getting approvals, dealing with the infrastructure. I mean, we heard no end of that, how difficult it is. There was a need expressed. There are a lot of workers there on McClellan Park, but they're leaving. They're coming to work and they're going out. So there is a market there for housing. And we've heard there's a lot of vacant land and low prices. For Folsom, we saw some, we saw in construction, some existing affordable housing with some vacant first floor retail under construction. But really we heard, and Rochelle shared with us, there was concern from stakeholders about kind of more inspired design. Really, how do we use this housing as a catalytic opportunity? So for regional recommendations, again, looking at your corridors and your larger regional vision of getting more infill housing, you need to look at higher density per unit in your corridors to really create the market, create the density, and support retail. I mean, don't forget, housing supports retail, and you need bodies. And it's not enough to have single-family neighborhoods to support long corridors worth of retail. And we know that with AB 2011 that just went through the legislature, under certain conditions, including having a certain percent of affordable housing, pretty much housing on commercial corridors can be by right. So there's a lot of opportunity, depending on how you feel about the various state efforts to streamline housing development. There is opportunity to do this, but you do need to look at your zoning. And importantly, you need to look at your parking requirements at the corridor and neighborhood level. So we can't tell you prescriptively right now without more work what to set your parking levels at, but we know that if we realize these 15-minute communities that Yvonne talked about in our family-friendly neighborhoods, you're going to require fewer cars per household because people are going to be able to make trips on foot or on bike, and they're going to want to do that with their families. Mix of uses means that you create different demand at different times of day, so you can look at shared parking opportunities. I mean, there are so many surface lots and vacant land, you could do some shared parking in your nodes. And then consider removing your parking minimums. Again, that'll vary city by city or corridor by corridor, but these are things you have to take really seriously if you want to get infill housing on your corridors and make it more affordable to deliver. Further regional recommendations, we know that Folsom is looking at a form-based code. We think that is a great idea, but the real theme there is creating flexibility in your codes to kind of work with the market and the development community. We heard across the board in North Watt, they have this adopted corridor plan in 2012. It had great ideas. We heard across the board it was too prescriptive. I mean, so much so that it actually precluded a housing development that was proposed. So get your vision clear and then realize your vision through codes that can be flexible and work within the market. You can streamline your entitlement processing. We talked about things like creating case management, but again, there are tools at the state level. One of the challenges, again, I work for SCAG and we cover 191 cities and 6 counties, and we surveyed them and actually just released a bunch of materials. They're on our website. They'll be in your briefing book, a link. And we're going to do some workshops targeting staff, right, at the jurisdictional level about how do you take advantage of streamlining? How do you work with what the state offers, but how do you as staff move things through more ministerially? So really prioritizing that as a region and using your regional partner through SACOG to do that can create more capacity for housing and more interest from developers. design guidance to really get inspired design and work within the corridors. And we heard really different things, but we heard a lot that either developers weren't interested. I mean, when we talked, and this was more like the anecdotally over drinks, people were like, no one wants to go to North Watt, no one wants to go there. I think for Folsom, I think there was just more limited developer pool. So how do you expand that pool? You need to go out and figure out who are the developers doing this work, who's creative, who's a little risky, who leads with design and sustainability, and go after them and tell them what you're doing to make it feasible to develop in these corridors. You can be aggressive and do that, particularly when they're hearing from the staff and the elected officials. So these, again, broader regional recommendations. And then going specifically into North Watt, you've got to revisit your corridor plan. I think staff told us that, so I don't think we're telling you anything you don't know. But you've got to get a little more flexibility. Keep your vision. You want the mixed-use community, but make it realistically feasible. Look at, you can consider form-based zoning, but it's really about flexibility. We had some thoughts about creating an innovation district with codes to encourage new production strategies. So Yvonne talked to us about ways you can get housing up, 2 weeks per floor, but try to do things that kind of spark innovation and interest in that corridor, because you're really going to have to drive some interest to get folks there. And then think about, again, if you're doing this whole sewer plan and looking at utilities, you can do some innovative district level stuff like Blackwater in LA or in Santa Monica. I've learned about some recycled water zones. So again, picking up the sustainability vision at a district level that Lewis talked about. More on North Watt. You got about 40 acres. This is from your briefing book. We just mapped some of your vacant land. You have a lot. It was amazing driving down. I've never seen anything like that. Buy it. Buy it, county, and keep it, because here's the deal. When you are successful, the gentrification is great, you mix incomes, the displacement happens fast. And when the public sector owns that land, you can hold it and make sure it's for the kinds of affordable and mixed income communities that you want to see. So I know that's expensive. How do you do it? Your transfer tax that I saw is about $1.10 per $1,000 of value. That's low for California. At least in Southern California, most cities are around $4 per $1,000 of value. Now that's a heavy lift. You have to do a tax initiative. You need a 2/3 vote, but that's a wild idea to throw out there. You could look at the potential for an EIFD, both for your infrastructure and for land acquisition. It's hit or miss about how much money those really generate, but there is some need to get creative, but you have real opportunity there. For Folsom, and I should note, I just want to note this image that Lewis threw together. Oh, I didn't talk about this one. That is an actual vacant site about a half mile from your light rail station, and he put about 180 units on 2 acres. So just to give a sense, that is an existing vacant site that can be developed near your transit. So next we look at Folsom. You need to revise your parking requirements. You've got plenty of parking for the retail. It's kind of overparked in the area. As we talked about with your 15-minute communities, you really have a lot of great hubs there. So prioritize development near those hubs to start getting that walkability going and the energy. Again, you need to go out and actively recruit developers, and it's a lovely community, and you have a good market in terms of your demographics and spending potential. So I think you'll have a really easier time getting some new energy and blood into this area. Have some design guidelines that are both about the inspired design of the building, but also connecting at the ground floor to creating these walkable places. And then finally, orienting towards your existing residential areas, but keeping your strong connection to the retail spine. So now I'm going to turn it over to Rochelle to take us into your order of operations.
I was thinking about the cycle of grief, and I put it in the context of the cycle of our 5 or 6 days here. And the cycle starts off with, from Sunday, Monday, Tuesday to today, wonder, hope, imposter syndrome. By Wednesday, an incredible feeling of failure. Thursday is desperation. And Friday, we're back to wonder. And the reason why that's important is, as I was looking at our order of operation, that same cycle exists, and I'll walk you through it. In putting this plan together, it is important that we understand the priority of the sequencing. And so these slides are really key, and we had a lot of discussion on it. Critically important is to hit the ground running. You've got momentum, you've got interest. What can we do right now? Starting with number one on priority items, assuming that you need about a 2-year length of time to really get rocking and rolling, we need to create a singular vision. What we found is that there are numerous studies, and I applaud you for creating numerous studies, but the studies often conflict. They make different recommendations. They've been taking place around different times. The first thing to do is to consolidate all of these various reports and come up with a singular, clear vision. You can't get there if you don't know where you're going. So create a singular vision, plan for infrastructure improvements. And one thing I'd love to say is don't plan for what you need now, but plan for the vision that you have in mind. Create, for example, in your infrastructure improvements, rather than having zones where people drive by, look at how you get people to stop by and stay for a while. And as we've heard several times today, dig once. So planning for infrastructure improvements is critical. You've got lighting, sewer, all of those things. It's good to plan it now, comprehensively and strategically, so that when that ground opens up, you can take care of everything and plan for your future. Number 3, implement pop-up placemaking ideas. We talked about that, so I won't need to go into that. Number 4, this is not new. No money, no mission. Raise capital, raise capital. Identify partners, identify public and private partnerships, consider real estate funds. I was so excited when I heard the chamber mention these things. There are grants out there and other sources. This is the time to build those relationships. It takes about 2 years to bring them to fruition. You've got a great, passionate project, a time that people are interested in it, so move forward. Now, on the dig once side, this is our cycle of hope. Start with your infrastructure improvements. That's your wonder and hope. You cannot build housing. You cannot build the kind of development and revitalization you want if the infrastructure is not placed. There's your wonder and hope. Install those mobility hubs, part of the wonder and hope. Break ground on the housing developments along Bidwell. That's going to be your imposter syndrome, because you're going to have a lot of fight, but you've got it. You've got great ideas. You've got vision. That's where you need to make sure you are building those stakeholder relationships so that they can support you on that. Working with the business owners to improve the facades. And dare I say, we've got to address those parking areas. That's going to be your moment of failure and desperation. But when you get down to the last, that's where your hope comes back and you can repeat this process. So I encourage you to stick in there. You've got a lot invested in it. You've got a lot of investment that's going to move forward. I encourage you to move forward and invest that time. Don't give up. In the order of operations, here's a priority for optimal success at the agency and public sector level. Number 1, streamline and reform the process. You know this. One thing I will say that I believe Jenna had mentioned, communicate and coordinate between agencies. We've talked about this. Sometimes we feel like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, but if you want to move forward, we've got to get around the same table. So support pilot projects. That's something that Lewis talked about. This is a great time to emphasize innovation. In the second bullet, it is adopt form-based code and add some by right development within the commercial corridors. We can't get it done if there's no will to get it done. And this go back to the wonder and hope. Yes, you're going to feel like an imposter. Yes, you're going to get pushback. But this is critical for us to be able to do something. Create an RFP process to attract new developers and new design teams. If you want to be excited by it, get people who are willing to invest in that excitement. You run this process. Be in charge of it. dramatically increase the density across project areas to achieve a net increase. Now, we know that's a heavy pull, but you cannot achieve the kind of revitalization that we have heard talked about by putting up duplexes and ADUs. And so you're going to have to really bring that together. And I trust that you can do this. I know you can make it palatable and that you can evangelize the folks so that they pick up that baton and want to help build these corridors. Identify and assemble the land for development. Bring in partnerships that are needed. Consider partnering with some of the business owners. There are underutilized pieces of property in both corridor areas. How do you get to activate those and find that win-win? And finally, the tax word. We know that this requires money and a heavy lift. As Jenna said, you have some room in your fees to do it incrementally, but create a dedicated source for housing and improvements in the corridors and adjacent areas. Consider floating a bond, adding a tax initiative. I know they always start off temporary and end up permanent, but you've got big dreams and it can't be done without the checkbook. So that is our suggestion for your order of operations and your priorities, and I am going to go to the next speaker.
Well, believe it or not, we're close to the end. And now that I've recovered from the shock of being called esteemed, I think I can actually get us there pretty quickly. Yesterday, I asked the panel to vote on 3 questions. 1, do you believe that extensive revitalization of the 2 corridors under study is not only a good idea, but is necessary? The answer was unanimous, yes, but with the condition that necessary was going to be replaced by imperative. Second question, do you believe that the addition of significant amounts of mixed income housing on these corridors is not only advisable, but necessary? Again, unanimous, yes, but we wanted me to replace the word necessary with essential. 3, do you believe that the revitalization of the 2 corridors to create an economically viable mixed use, mixed income, walkable, environmentally sensitive communities can be achieved? Again, yes, but with some of the caveats that we've talked to earlier in this: infrastructure, funding, lighting, safety. I mean, it's a big haul. Our panel has absolutely no doubt that the revitalization of the 2 corridors is necessary and can be successfully completed. In fact, our report is just one, or just the latest in a long line of studies, all of which have been substantially in agreement as to what should be done along the commercial corridors. The real issue is how to accomplish the revitalization. In preparing our report, we have attempted to focus on how best to achieve the revitalization of the corridors and how best to include mixed-income housing units in the effort. It is our hope that we have not only identified specific recommendations for each corridor which will help you achieve your goals, but have also identified certain macro principles that can be used across SACOG's area of influence. Look, we're well aware of the discomfort and, in fact, fear that can be caused by these recommendations, but fundamental change is never easy. It can't be done without substantial anxiety. But in the opinion of this panel, the continuation of the status quo is just unacceptable. Without a substantial revitalization effort, it is our opinion that the 2 corridors under study will continue to slide into irrelevancy with a total loss of economic viability. We fully understand and acknowledge the concerns of the existing business owners on the corridors as to the impact the revitalization plan may have on their businesses, and we cannot overemphasize the importance of making every effort to address those concerns, but without revitalization, we see little hope that the corridors will not cease to be economically viable places to operate a business. It is also clear to the panel that there is a serious shortage of housing that is affordable to low and moderate income individuals and families. This shortage represents a major threat to the economic viability and social vitality of the community as a whole. Without immediate action to rectify this housing shortage, the community will continue to experience the exodus of its younger members, as well as moderate and low-income families, due to their inability to find housing that they can afford. It's interesting to note that when we talked to the students group, the question was asked, how many of you intend to live here in this community after you finish your education? None, not one. And the universal answer was, there's no way we'll ever be able to afford to live here. Get back to where I was. The panel believes that the two quarters under consideration are excellent starting places to place substantial numbers of new housing units, provided the infrastructure improvements are addressed. The ability to provide high-density, multifamily housing along these two traffic corridors will not only relieve the pressure to increase density in existing single-family home neighborhoods, but will allow for the development of housing that has ready access to transit, services, and is affordable to a wide range of residents. It's also important to note that it will be affordable and available for older citizens looking forward to living in smaller areas, smaller places, and will not only relieve them of the burden of maintaining single-family residence, but will allow for easy access to essential services without the use of an automobile. Equally important are the environmental issues that challenge the study area. The lack of sufficient green areas, the absence of an adequate tree canopy, the excess amount of asphalt parking lots, the vast quantities of noxious gases produced by intense automobile traffic are not only a threat to the climate, but to the health of the residents living in or close to the study area. Any revitalization plan will give the community the ability to address these issues head-on. The proposed revitalization plan in the two corridors is a huge undertaking with a myriad number of issues that will need to be addressed and require years, and I want to emphasize this, years of effort. Success will require leadership, both political and community champions, political and community will, commitment, finance, resources, courage. Remember, we're talking about increasing taxes. Patience, understanding, compromise, and most importantly, resolve and endurance. We are absolutely sure that at times it's going to be impossible, feel impossible. But in the words of Nelson Mandela, it always seems impossible until it is done. As difficult as it will be, the panel believes that the goal of revitalizing these two quarters is not only possible, but be well worth the effort in the end. Thank you. Questions? We'll take questions from the audience if you have them now. What I'm going to ask is you sort of point them at me, and then I'll make sure the right person gets to answer. Anybody have any? Now that you've been here half a day?
Thank you. Rochelle, in the beginning, you had said that one of the feedback you got was that the vision would be impossible. Do you remember? Sorry.
Oh, I think I know what you're talking about. What we found was that some people bought into the vision and others just did not. I don't know that they felt it was impossible. I think that they were fatigued by the number of studies that have been done so far and were more, I would say, kind of indifferent to it.
Thank you for that clarification. I have one other question, and I think you all answered it, is whether there's an appetite for a business owners association to do a lighting and landscape district or something like that.
I don't like to use the word should, but there should be. Whether there is, we're not clear on right now because we didn't get that much into it. The 95% of the questions involving business owners was a fear that their businesses were going to be decimated and they were going to lose their slots as we did this plan. You know, I understand how they feel like they're going to lose their business, but I also know that increased population within walking distance could be a catalyst for a revival of their businesses. It's just something you're going to have to work your way through. By the way, their concerns need to be treated as being legitimate. Okay, they're valid, legitimate. These are not made up, irrational fears. But we have to come with a way to try and work our way through that.
Excuse me. For questions from the audience and for our panels to respond, you have to speak in the microphone for it to be recorded. So we do have virtual participation with over 70 people. Also, with any questions from the audience, I ask that you state your name and your affiliation before the question. Thank you.
I will say that we had an opportunity to speak with the Chamber of Commerce in Folsom and a couple of business owners. It was them who suggested a real estate fund and going after grants. When we talked about doing major renovations or changes, that's when the business owners asked for assistance. So it did appear that they were willing to put some effort into it, but I will say that the onus was on, is going to be on the other than the business community to convince them of the long-term value of it.
Can I just add, since we're talking about Folsom in this question, but I just want to know, because we had to split up to do the interviews for North Watt. It's interesting because we noted there is a P-bid in the area, but I think Mary, despite her best efforts, couldn't get anybody to respond and come. There's a North Highlands Chamber, also not responsive. And then McClellan Park, we did get to talk to folks from there. I mean, they're wildly successful, what they've done at McClellan Park. So what an amazing partner they could be, an organization that represents so many workers and knows what they're doing. So I just want to note there is a bid in a chamber there and the complete absence of participation, and then a large owner who really could be a catalyst for change. So I just want to include that corridor in this conversation, different space, different issues, but opportunity.
I'm Desmond Parrington with the City of Folsom. My question is for both of these areas, given the sustained focus that will be needed to make to revitalize both these areas and kind of make the vision a reality. What strategies have you seen work to keep the community, political leaders, and businesses engaged in that process throughout? Because as you've noted, there's study after study that's been done. People move on after those studies. It's often very challenging to keep folks focused so that these plans can actually come to fruition.
From my redevelopment days, we did community-based work, focusing on corridors to revitalize. And our best advocates is we'd have like a community advisory committee. So you have these engaged stakeholders in Folsom, bring them together, and depending on what you do, whether you have a city council motion directing a focus to bring together these plans, but whatever it is, you can form some kind of a regular advisory body to work with you in this process, to give you partners, to give you ideas, but also importantly, to give you the support to move forward. That would be my recommendation.
Just to add to that a little slightly different way, you have to lead this effort with the housing. Right? That obviously infrastructure comes first, okay, and maybe some transportation work. But what people are really afraid of is when they hear terms like 100 units per acre or 50 units per acre, they have no conception of what that actually looks like or feels like. And all they see is giant Soviet-style concrete blocks that go 20 stories up. That is absolutely not the case. I fully believe having your first property with that sort of density in place that people can see will actually lead to more community involvement and support. I know it's hard to do when you don't have the support to get the first one, but once you get the first one, if you lead with that housing, that first project, I think everything starts to fall in place when they realize their fears are wrong. I mean, we can show them all the pictures and drawings and everything you want. It's just, they don't believe it until they see it, okay?
I will tell you that we did some work in a city that we could not get the community out. On one hand, it was good because there were no negative comments, but no comments is also not great. What we did was we created an arts commission, an arts committee. I think the title was lofty enough to have some cachet, but our surprise was we were able to bring in elected city staff members, local community members, young people. We had high school students, and they were able to create a vision or attach to the vision that we created, that they created, and then create the art and atmosphere around it. It gave people an opportunity to have a tangible role in the process. We thought that that was just a one-off because we needed to get stakeholders to speak, and it turned into something that the next community or the next neighborhood called and said, well, where's our arts committee? You know, we want to select artists. We want to create that cultural spine, or we want to do that enhancement on the properties that are coming or the housing that's coming. What I'm saying is it doesn't have to be grandiose. I think it is, the key word is engagement. And so long as somebody has a role where they can say, I was a part of this. And we have the residents now taking people on tours of, you know, this is the light fixture we designed. That was something we never expected, but that sense of pride, I think, is really important.
If I can, Phil, just want to mention one thing as well. Just like an association would create a celebration or a theme just to gather that association together, so is it important to create those kind of opportunities for communities. I mean, that's it. In essence, what we're talking about is these hubs and nodes of experiences that draw people together, right? And you've got to really have a stick-to-itiveness, okay? Recently, over just this summer, we started off with 15 individuals. We just concluded on Tuesday 125 participants because we were very vigilant on a monthly basis, creating experiences that draw people together. So I would really suggest that that's one way in which to gain some momentum.
And if I can just add to mine, which I know is not appropriate, but when you're talking about things like the density and certain things, it's important that, I think it's important you make it clear to the public that these are within these zones. So you're stopping the argument that, well, they're going to do it to my house. It's within the zone that it can be 50 to 100 units. And that actually pulls pressure off the single-family neighborhoods because you have a place to put this high-density stuff. The other key is going to be, touch and go on the economics of producing this housing in an economic way, economically feasible way, sorry. So there's going to have to be some incentives or some promotion to get people, private developers, to come in. I would encourage you to stay away or try to avoid making cash payments into the developer, okay? That's where the public gets concerned. But there are other things you can do. The density is one. Getting the helping with the infrastructure for the project. Waiving or reducing fees like the impact fee. Truly expediting the approval process, which is why we've talked about form-based and by right. Just so there's an advantage to get in there. And I think what you'll do is you'll start finding that you're going to pull the developers where they're really interested in doing the area. And that will help you get going. But people have to see the housing. That's what they're afraid of.
Thank you. We have 15 minutes left for Q&A, and we have a question over here.
Just real quick, for those out there in Zoom land, if you'd like to ask a question, go ahead and use the raise your hand feature, or if you're participating telephonically, please hit *9. Again, *9 if you're participating telephonically, raise hand if you are participating normally in Zoom. This is for Zoom only participants.
Dave DeFonte with the county. Actually, that was a great comment to tee off of. So first, thank you very much for your help. This is a fantastic presentation. My question is relative to North Watts. So there was a comment, I believe it was Jenna, that you made about your conversations with developers and not being interested in coming to North Watt. Is that due to the constraints that you've talked about, lack of sewer, restrictive zoning, et cetera, or is it something, more fundamental related to market conditions? And I guess more directly, if we built the sewer, if we wiped the zoning slate clean and made it, by right for 100 units, et cetera, would that attract investment, or is there still something fundamentally there at issue that we need to address?
I think that's a great question. And since we're supposed to be candid and Phil wanted us to say things, I mean, a lot of these were anecdotal conversations as someone who worked in redevelopment and worked in pretty blighted lower income communities, it's not everybody's swimming pool, right? It just isn't. Doing public-private deals isn't everybody's swimming pool. So I think some of it is people just look at that corridor and go, no thanks. So there are going to be some people, even if you do the sewer and drainage plan and you have a plan to invest in the sewer, and you could do the plan and you can go to the iBank and get a low interest loan, and you can recalibrate your development impact fees so that there's certainty about what it's going to cost, right? If you are going to have to do it development by development, which is possible, you could do all the things, the by right, and some people still won't come. I mean, you have to accept that. But there are people with the vision. There are developers, for-profit and nonprofit, that make their living because they have that vision to go into communities. You also have all of the state density bonus laws. You have the light rail. With your Caltrans study, I hope you're going to be, I know that the staff is going to be looking at BRT, and you have the potential to have density to support bus rapid transit. So you're going to have to expand the pool. But I will tell you, from what I heard, there are just some folks who just don't see it, and they're not going to see it, and that's okay. They're not your people. But you will find them. They are out there. And you have, by the way, so much vacant land. I mean, it's shocking to drive down that corridor and see giant swaths of vacant land. So I am an optimistic believer because this is what I do and that I'm dedicated to. So that's where you start getting forums and you start going and reaching out. But you got to set the stage and take advantage of all the opportunities from by right zoning and that kind of thing. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I just want to add into that. So I think from the development industry, what they're looking for is certainty. So certainty, not just about, how many units can I build, but what is the actual community value? Because consultants are not able to tell them that. And they also need to leverage on the existing community so that it can very quickly, when the housing is in, when the retail spaces is in, it generate activity. So I think that's very important. We have experience when we are trying to do it all. Acres and acres, hundreds of acres of land, like trying to do the perfect master plan, and it's not able to move forward. So what we realize is a proven strategy is that break it down, but focusing on the key low-hanging fruit that everybody can see visually and experience. So that is the public realm, putting a new park, upgrading a portion of the streetscape. Like these are the key things that would generate the excitement. And I think lastly is that with the technology, and particularly the need to calculate, how we're doing in terms of decarbonization, resiliency and all that, there's opportunity for you to further streamline. So invest in this digital twin, because that can expedite your development review approval. Everybody can see what is existing, what you can leverage on, and what are the gaps. And for the transportation folks, they can use it to generate, to really understand when we're talking about TDM, what is reasonable and how to get there. Parking need to be a temporary infrastructure. It need to phase out. It's killing performer, is hurting the environment, and it's also setting you back. So I think those are the key strategy, but the key is that you don't need to have a perfect plan to start to do with it, but break it down and doing things concurrently.
Okay. Okay. So, I also want to respond directly to that, Dave. It's really important that you don't jump to solutions and you spend a little bit of time thinking through what are the core assets and what is the core opportunity. And what are we trying to solve from a regional level? What does McClellan have? It has land, it has airport access, rail access, road access, and it sits on top of the nation's backbone fiber network cable running in the UP right away. But what do we need to do to change the housing market? We're confronted with labor and material costs, production that we're still building housing like we built it in 1812, quite candidly. McClellan has the opportunity to become a pilot housing innovation lab where you actually start to play with developers, incubate developers, develop new building technologies. Be a great place to actually have a modular housing factory or 2 or 3. ADUs are now being done in sort of drop and go fashion. Factory OS at Mare Island is building housing in 68,000-pound, 72-foot long boxes and can shorten the construction time of 100-unit buildings, 100-unit per acre buildings by about 40%. And they're starting to prove that the costs go down if you have flexible capital. So thinking about McClellan as an anchor resource for the region, as a way of actually piloting all of these new solutions, to my belief, is actually really, really essential because it has a labor pool, it has access, it has all the key ingredients of actually being able to do this and stimulate the muscle memory of thinking about solutions differently. And this is one of the key things is you can't solve this, right? And this is Einstein. You can't solve problems with the same thinking that created it. And we're at a moment in time where we need to think really critically differently about the infrastructure, the mobility patterns, how we deliver housing, and the communities that we want. Yeah, my kids are in their mid-20s, and they really want community. They don't want to have to drive their car 40 miles each way to a job.
I'm going to invite some questions from the virtual audience. If you can please, state your question. Jose, yes, Jose Mobipabam. Yeah. Can you please?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Again, thanks again for the great presentation. Really interested in the dig once recommendation, especially representing one of the utilities here in the region. Are there some best practices or some other jurisdictions that you would recommend that we look at that do that well, that we might be able to replicate coordination amongst public works and the varying utilities to align better?
I'll answer. I don't know any off the top of my head, and I'll share, ironically, that on behalf of SCAG and Southern California, we're actually going to be doing an advisory services panel like this in early spring, focused on that question about how to better partner with utilities to align investments with our housing element site inventory. So I will invite you all to be part of that if you want to come down to beautiful Los Angeles, because that is a really good question and one that we haven't been able to answer. I mean, the better example I can give you, having worked at a transit agency, is in LA, you know, we're ripping up streets all over the place. And so we do these mitigation plans where, like, once you're digging up the streets, when you put them back, you identify things called betterments. And so Metro would coordinate with communities and sometimes utilities, since when they're digging up to put their tracks, they were disrupting utilities. So that was a big coordination effort where we would actually, my team would do first, last mile, you know, streetscape planning to go with, you know, once we're digging up to build the train, how do you put it back a different way? And then we'd find out from the city, oh, by the way, we need to replace, you know, the sewer line or run some cable. So transit agencies, I think, have a good record when they're building transit of doing that coordination across the entities that are using all that right away.
I can share 3 examples. One is in Florida. So when they look at the water infrastructure, they have a one water initiative. So wastewater, fresh water, and also stormwater all into one. So that's a good start. Another one is from San Diego. It's really from a leadership level, whenever there is proposal put forward, asking for funding for infrastructure investment, they will ask some key question. One of the key questions is that apart from co-benefits, can you demonstrate how you can combine infrastructure investment and delivery at the same time? Like, in other words, that means that different commission would need to lump their resources together into one piece. So the third example, putting that a little bit more tangible, is that, for example, when you are upgrading your transportation infrastructure, at the same time you put in broadband. At the same time, you put in the upgrade of the hard infrastructure. So you don't need to individual developer. They come in, do the study, and then they send out their own crew to upgrade the sandy and water and those elements. So, and then the last one I can share is the human infrastructure. So there is an opportunity for the private sector to provide the shell. And then when the public sector is ready, you can use that for operation. So for example, expanding the school facilities because the school, the number of students is going to grow. So that would avoid you to spend money on the temporary infrastructure, such as the portable that we see today.
So Tony Powers, if you would like to ask your question, please. Okay, I guess not. Okay, so Pat and Jill, would you like to ask your question? Pat?
Okay, there we go. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, as everyone else said, great presentation. One item that you lightly touched on that would certainly like to hear, best practices on is engaging the public and the decision makers in a way that's diverse, inclusive, that really grabs the holistic aspects of what's trying to be done here in regards to revitalization. You have best practices on ways to engage communities. I understand each community is going to be unique based on their attributes, but any best practices you can offer the group?
The thing that I just would like to offer is this. Sometimes we talk about, community engagement without really outlining what are those buckets of community you want to engage. Oftentimes, the approach is around the technical stuff. And immediately, if you can think about it, those of us that are engaged in these systems, if you will, these jurisdictions, we speak a certain language that doesn't translate very well and easily. So engaging people around celebrations, engaging people around experiences. We'll get to the technical stuff, but I don't think the technical stuff ought to lead in all instances. And so keeping that in mind, I think, is very important. We also center experiences around arts. And when we get to a particular point, the technical stuff. So again, it's combining later in a presentation the technical needs or the technical asks, but leading off with the experience, okay, and the invitation to own a part of the process. That's what I think has been helpful for us.
I want to add a few things that I've been engaged with in redevelopment with Metro and also some of the work we're doing at SCAG. To the extent that you have community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, folks that are leaders. One woman who worked for a very powerful supervisor for many years said to me, find the 5 decision makers in that community and work through them because they will bring people. So in Folsom, it sounds like you have an engaged community. Think about the advisory committee, hold events, as Keith said, but go to soccer games, right? Go to whatever's happening in the community, the swim meet, rec centers, and set up a booth there to get feedback and get people engaged. Hold your pop-up events, have a booth. I think for the Watt corridor, we noted suggesting a transformative climate community because there isn't the social infrastructure, so get a grant and build the community infrastructure. But find all those different touch points, meet people where they're at, hold events and invite folks to come and work through your natural community leaders.
Okay, time's up. We're through. We really appreciate you being here today. We hope this has been of some benefit to you. So thank you very much. We've all enjoyed the week here, or at least we will next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.